Could you move to the center or up further, because we can't see.
Executive Director of Sears State Parks Foundation. So we've kind of collaborated together to have these speaker series. So these speaker series connect the rich cultural and natural history of this region to the public. Please donate to Sears State Parks Foundation today to support the interpretation, restoration, and preservation of the park system in this area. So your tax-deductible donation can be kept locally and applied to all these priority projects, similar to the ones that Heidi was just talking about. So SearsStateParks.org for information on that. So with me today are Bob Crowley and Tim Tweetmeyer. So Bob and Tim are part of the 4-member team of ultra-distance athletes who share a passion for history and aim to honor the lives and courage of the Forlorn Hope members of the historic Donner Party of 1846. So last year, the modern Forlorn Hope expedition departed on December 16th, the same date in 1846, when 17 Donner Party emigrants set out on snowshoes in a desperate attempt to cross the mountains and reach the settlement near Sacramento, 100 miles away, just to seek help for their family that were stuck here at the lake. So after enduring this punishing physical, mental, and emotional hardship, only 7 survived. Both Bob and Tim are experienced ultra runners, and in this Sears speaker series, we'll talk about their original journey, along with their reprise, and pictures, and kind of talk about their whole journey, kind of following the steps from history. All right, so please take note of any questions you might have for Bob and Tim. Afterwards, we're going to do a short question and answer. So if you have any kind of burning questions after the documentary, we'll kind of dig into that and can ask the questions. So please help me welcome Bob and Tim.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for being here tonight, braving the weather. Hopefully it's more pretty snow than it is dangerous snow. That's what we're counting. So thank you for coming and to be here to learn about this great American pioneer story. My name's Bob Crowley, and over there is my partner and friend and expedition partner, Tim Tweetmeyer. And we're honored to be in this very historic spot amongst many of the people that work here every day, tirelessly, on behalf of the Donner Party, the state parks, the national parks, and educating adults and children all year long. So we're just a couple of amateurs, and we're thrilled to be amongst some of the people that really make this place happen. So much of American pioneer history has happened right here. And you can feel, when you walk around the area, even right here, right now, the presence of the people that trod before us to open up the west of the United States. Now, Tim and I, our first passion, as Jeremy said, is running. We're mountain runners, but we're also avid history buffs, and we love to read. And so we got the bright, or maybe not so bright idea, not too long ago, to try to combine all 3 of those passions together: history, running, and reading. And so we called it History Trail Trekking. And the idea was, could we go out and discover trails that maybe have been lost or not fully discovered, find them through research in both the books and in the field, and then map them, and then the very last part, go do it. So do a reprise of whoever was on that trail before. And that's exactly what we did for about 7 years to get us to where we were last year in December, to reprise the Forlorn Hope journey, which of course was done once and then never done again because they got lost. So it was a tough trail to find, but we feel like we got the majority of it. So let's get started. Over the next 40 minutes, what we're going to do is invite you to join us on an expedition. And we're going to retrace the footsteps of the Forlorn Hope and share with you the story and their motivations and ultimately the impact that they had on California and American history. The film footage and many of the photos that you're going to see tonight were put together by our colleague Keith Sutter. He was a National Geographic photographer and filmmaker. Tom Zekas, another Truckee filmmaker, and Elka Reamer, who's right here tonight, one of our expedition partners, also quite a good filmmaker as well. So you'll see some beautiful footage, and it's thanks to those 3 folks. So next slide, we're going to take you through an intro, and then Tim will take it from there.
So how do we set up this Donner Party story in the Forlorn Hope? Well, as you know, in 1846, it was the time of manifest destiny. The immigrants from the east got to the middle of the country in St. Joe's and Independence and launched out to California because that was the thing to do. Free or cheap land, great weather, places to grow crops and prosper. People were looking for a new start. So they launched from those areas, came across the plains, and in 1846, every party made it over Donner Pass. You had to get there before the snows got, like today. It's going crazy up there. Only one didn't make it, and that was the Donner Party. And they got stuck here at the lake, and some of them were over at Alder Creek, on a little north of Highway 49, or 89, I'm sorry. And they spent 6 weeks from just about this time. They came here right about October 31st, and they tried several times to get over the pass. They were successful getting over the pass, but could go no further due to the snow. And they'd come back, and then they'd try again and come back. Several attempts, and they finally realized the thing that would change is they had to build some snowshoes in order to get through Summit Valley and all the way out to get to Johnson's Ranch, which is where the first settlement was beyond, from here at Donner Lake. So they started out, they decided they were going to have to build a snowshoe party. So it was known as the Snowshoe Party. And later on, tagged Forlorn Hope when McClashen wrote about it in his first book in 1880. They built snowshoes primarily on the knowledge of Franklin Graves, who was a Vermont outdoorsman, and Charles Stanton, who was the leader of the bunch. And they decided that was the only way they were going to get out. And so they built the snowshoes and started out on December 16th, 1846. And when they started out, they had no idea that before they got to Johnson's Ranch, that bunch would see half of the group die, including the leader. They would go 5 times and not eat for 3 days at a bunch. They would run into like a 100-year snowstorm, and what they thought was going to be a 6-day travel turned out to be a 33-day march. And what they expected to be 65, 70 miles turned out to be 90, 95 miles. And so it was a tough trek. And this is a picture of them at Hastings Cutoff. They had been duped to take Hastings Cutoff, which had primarily never been used by wagons, which caused them to be a little bit later to Donner Lake, which caused the snows to fly before they could get over the pass, and they got stuck here. And that's why the Forlorn Hope had to take off and try to save the rest of the bunch at the lake.
So this is their story, the Forlorn Hope, what we think and have termed as one of the greatest endurance treks in the history of the world. And you'll see why here in the next few minutes. We use the expedition as a way to try to discover the why and the how, to retrace the route and to honor these 17 members and souls that came out of the Donner Party and dared the selfless act of going up and over the pass through the snow. So we're here to honor perseverance and endurance and grit and measure their impact on society and the legacy that they left behind. Theirs is a tribute to ordinary people doing extraordinary things, an examination of the human instinct and the human will to survive.
Forlorn Hope bunch was chosen from the strongest of the group because they needed the strongest to make it through. They realized that in a few times they made it over the pass how tough this was going to be. So they took not only the youngest that were the strongest, but also the maturest who understood the gravity of the event. What you're looking at here are tribute cards that we carried along with us on our journey, which is one tribute card for each member that went on the Forlorn Hope. And each of these names that are coming up are those that were on the group. Now, they ended up with 17 starters. Obviously, you want a big enough group that if you're traveling in the snow, a bigger group is going to be easier. You can cycle through. A person that's leading for an hour can go to the back, and the next person can take over. And they were mostly all young, average age 22. If you eliminate Franklin Graves, who was kind of the spiritual leader of the bunch, he was 58, which is how I got into the story. I was about 58 when I really dug into the story. I said, wow, this is, I don't know if I can do that. The youngest was Lemuel Murphy, a 12-year-old a young man whose 2 sisters were in the group. And so they had the snowshoes made by Franklin Graves and Charles Stanton, and they only had one person that had been on the route before. Charles Stanton had actually traveled all the way to Suttersport and come back, but they had no compass, they had no real guide other than Stanton, no map. And so they set off. The first 17, 2 returned pretty quickly. They couldn't make it along. And so the 15 went on. 5 women and 10 men. There were mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters, and just all families that have grouped together to make this run. What you see on the screen now on the left are the 7 that survived. All of the women made it. All 5 women survived, but only 2 of the men. And it really did pay to be in that 19 to 30-year-old age group to go on. But they weren't outdoorsmen and trail finders and people like John Fremont and these other folks that have been out here. These were just average immigrants from the Midwest. Nothing special about them. They were ranchers, teachers. Stanton was a carriage maker, seamstresses and ranchers. Just regular people. But what was being asked of these people were ordinary people having to take on an extraordinary feat.
So Tim and I spent, as we said, about 7 years discovering the approximate 100-mile path that the Forlorn Hope took between Donner Lake, then Truckee Lake, and Johnson Ranch in Wheatland, California. Our research tenets are shown here alongside the OCTA, the Oregon-California Trail Association's manual on how to do proper research in the field. We combined academic research with extensive field surveying, spending hundreds of hours investigating clues. We worked in close partnership with several historical societies, American history scholars and authors, canine forensics, and archaeologists. We field tested all of our clues provided by primary and secondary sources, many of which conflicted. We spent triple the time in the field in places that the Forlorn Hope didn't go, eliminating theories by surveying the practicality of the landscape and placing ourselves in the mindset of being cold, starved, and disoriented. With dogged in-field work and eliminating all the illogical and impossible clues, we narrowed it down to a few logical and defensible clues, which we then pieced together into the trail. Once confident we had it, we formed the expedition team, which consisted of Tim and myself, Elka, who's here tonight, and Jen Hemming. And we made the plan to do a reprise, to experience firsthand the physical demands of the journey and to try to gain insight into the motivations and empathy for this enormous struggle and appreciation for the human will to survive. So we left Donner Memorial State Park right here, right outside that door on December 16th, 2020, just about a year ago, on the 174th anniversary of the Forlorn Hope departure.
This is the expedition team standing by Donner Pass. You might recognize Bob and I. I'm on the left, and Bob is between the 2 ladies. Elka's on the right. Elka, raise your hand real quick so everybody knows who you are. There you go. There's Elka on the far right. And then Jen Hemming is the gal with the white gloves on. And that was another great shot taken by Keith Sutter as we were doing some homework on the course and what the snow would be like a few weeks before we left. What you're going to see next is a video of some of the prep work that we did. And when you get to the end of this, you will see some video of Johnson Ranch, which is where this immigrant trail ended. It was the first point of civilization after the immigrants left Fort Bridger. Approximately 1,000 miles, mountains, desert, all kinds of stuff in the way. And you'll see Bill Holmes from the Wheatland Historical Society, as well as the California Trail Association, talking about Johnson Ranch and what it was like there.
And one thing I'll add is, in addition to working with Bill and the Wheatland Historical Society, we were honored to be given a tremendous amount of support from the Donner Summit Historical Society. Bill Oldergeist, if you hold your hand up, he's here, who's one of the leaders of that group. They provided us open door to every possible access and resource that we could possibly imagine. So it was a real collaborative effort.
country they saw.
Yeah, I know, that's what people don't realize, that's 1,000 miles, right? That was, the next civilization was Fort Bridger to Johnson's Ranch, 1,000 miles old, you know.
And they were in a foreign country.
Yeah, right.
This is not going to the United States, this is going,
Yeah, that's the great unknown.
and 46.
It's like we were kind of having a discussion yesterday, we were talking, Bob and I were talking to another rider, I said, you know, I said, when you look at Franklin Graves at 58,
Yeah, that was pretty
we were
cool.
considering, you know, he probably thought he wasn't going to make it, but he had to be the inspiration to get him going. And then when he passes and tells his daughters, hey, you need to do what you need to do, you know, it's kind of like, I was giving Bob, it's like that scene in Glory at the end when they're on the beach and Matthew Barker tells the guy, and if this man should fall, who's going to pick up the flag? And it's kind of like Franklin, like, again, you guys need to pick up the flag here. I'm not going to be able to help you any longer. You need to do this without me. And you know, they were able to press on. Those are the original wagon ruts in Johnson Ranch.
Well, shown here is a replica of the Forlorn Hope snowshoe made by our good friend Ed Hodges. Ed's an ex-principal and educator, and also pretty crafty with his hands and woodwork. The plan for the Forlorn Hope, as Tim said, was to follow the Overland Immigrant Trail that all wagon trains used in 1846 from right here at Truckee Lake, or Donner Lake, to Sutter's Fort. Charles Stanton had successfully crossed the Sierra and returned just weeks earlier with extra provisions for the depleted Donner Party. He would become the Forlorn Hope guide, along with 2 Miwok Indians who had accompanied Charles from Sutter Fort, named Luis and Salvador. Prior attempts to ascend and cross Donner Pass had failed due to the deep snow, estimated in some places to be 10 to 30 feet deep. Plus winds, more snowfall, and freezing temperatures, all which conspired to repel one attempt after the other. Franklin Graves, the 58-year-old farmer from Vermont, determined maybe it's snowshoes that ought to be the solution to get us up and over the pass. So he and Charles Stanton fashioned 14 pair of oxbow and rawhide snowshoes, just like what Ed's holding up there. That they took the ox bows, which were over their necks, split them in two, and then that created the curved effect, and then used the rawhide from the reins and actually made these snowshoes.
So now you can see it in this map. This is what you can see on the top there where it says black, the black line where it says plan. That is the standard immigrant route. That's where all the wagons would go to Johnson Ranch, where in its heyday, Johnson Ranch was seeing 100 wagons a day going through there. And what happened is they got going through in the normal route down along I-80, kind of on the backside of Kingvale, and they got to this place which is called the Wrong Turn. And this is where the Forlorn Hope kind of went into a really bad spot. The original idea was that it would take them maybe 10 days, and it was about 70 miles. It's actually quite a bit longer than that. It's more like 95, but in those days they didn't have GPS watches and things to tell them how far it was. And once they got to Johnson Ranch, then they would go the other 30, 40 miles on the Sutter's Fort, which was really kind of the hub of activity in the Sacramento Valley at the time. From there you went to what was known as Yerba Buena at the time, San Francisco. And the Forlorn Hope ended up going well over that 70 miles, and it took them 33 days rather than 10. And they made that fateful wrong turn at a place, if you know Highway 80 near the Lang Road off-ramp, it's about a mile south of there. Right near the freeway. You can walk there from the freeway. And that's where really things started to go bad for the Forlorn Hope.
So this yellow highlight shows the trail followed by the Forlorn Hope for their first 6 days. In our next video, we'll show you the expedition departing right here at the Memorial State Park at the east end of the lake. We read a note from a direct descendant of Franklin Graves, who sent us a lovely note before we headed out. And then we trekked in the footsteps of these pioneers. And although the surface landscape, of course, has been changed with time, the mountains and valleys, canyons, rivers, and foothills remain exactly the same. Our views were their views, and it was humbling and exciting for us. The video will show you the terrain the Forlorn Hope would have witnessed between Truckee Lake right here in Carpenter Flat, where they had the wrong turn 32 miles beyond. Progress, my 4 children and 9 grandchildren will be following you and wishing you best Godspeed.
This is a picture of Charles Stanton, our first hero of the story. Now, Charles started out as when he was a businessman in Chicago, had some ups and downs, and he decided to head to Independence because it was a boring and monotonous life in Chicago. He ended up jumping on with the Donner Party, and he was the only person who knew it because he had gone with Big Bill McCutcheon. Now, Charles was a slight guy, 5'5", little Big Bill McCutcheon, 6'6", part of the Donner Party. They had reached the Utah and Nevada border, and they realized, the whole bunch realized, this isn't going to end well if we don't get help. So Bill McCutcheon and Stanton rode at horseback all the way to Sutter's Fort, got supplies. McCutcheon ended up getting sick, so he had to stay behind. Stanton returns all the way to Reno with 2 Indian vaqueros, Lewis and Salvador. We'll play a prominent part of the story later on, with the mules, and they meet the bunch back in Reno. Nobody expected Stanton to come back. He had no reason to be coming back to Donner. He was a single man, no family, just was in for the adventure. But he was an honest, honorable guy who felt he had an obligation to those folks. And McCutcheon stayed behind. Stanton came up, and then he went with them all the way to Donner Lake and was with the bunch. And he was the leader, the only one who had been over the mountains, but he'd done it in dry ground. Snow is a completely different story. There's no trail after it snows again. You can't figure out where you've gone. He had no map, compass. And so they go on, and it's not far before Stanton starts to flag. He's falling behind the bunch, and 6 days into the trip, he's got snow blindness, he's fatigued. And the group decides, okay, we're going to be about ready to go. You coming along, Charles? Charles says, no, y'all go ahead, I'll be with you in just a second. And they never saw him again. So now the group is down to 14. Lost their leader, no map, no compass. It's snowing, and now they're going to have to lead themselves.
So despite losing Stanton, they remained on the Overland Immigrant Trail until reaching the end of 6 Mile Valley, which is up there near the Yuba Gap exit. It was here that the Miwok Indian, Luis and Salvador, became very confused, and the rest of the party became disoriented. A blizzard was upon them, and no ability to dead reckon. Now out of food, no compass, wet, cold, frostbitten, and exhausted, with their leader gone. Disagreements over whether to go back or press on ensued. Marianne Graves said she couldn't go back because she could not bear to listen to her little brothers and sisters begging for food. After much debate, it was decided to continue. But unbeknownst to them, their disorientation, combined with exhaustion and the onset of starvation and hypothermia, led to a decision to follow the path of least resistance. And that was 180 degrees in the wrong direction. They instead followed the gentle slope into one of the most desolate and dangerous places west of the Mississippi, the canyons of the North Fork of the American River.
Third was where the fateful mistake was made by the Forlorn Hope. They went across 6 Mile, they got into this little creek over here, and you need to take a little climb and get over what is now I-80, and make that little rise over the ridge, and then drop down into Bear Valley, and then you're home Creek, and the Bear River flows right to Johnson's Ranch. But they made the mistake right here. Rather than getting over that bridge and getting into Bear Valley, they made a wrong turn and headed into the North Fork. And this is the beginning of the North Fork of the North Fork. So this is where the wrong turn was, where the fateful mistake was made by the Forlorn Hope.
Right like that. So just like Bob mentioned, now they're going almost due south when they want to be going west. And they're heading down into what would be today Onion Valley. There's a campground there. And then through there, Tunnel Mills, and then down into an area known as Texas Hill and Burnett Canyon. And this is where, just like Aaron Gray said, the bunch is starting to get nervous and angry. And you can imagine how being lost and cold and wet and no food, and you're with a bunch of folks you just met, maybe a couple of months ago. If we took, 14 people in this room and said, hey, just go over the pass and then, have a couple of, beef jerkies and then keep going for another 30 days, you'd get into some discussions there. So the discussion went on, and one of the friends of James Reed, Patrick Dolan, decided, hey, guys, it's getting really desperate. I think maybe what we should do is go ahead and kill one of the group for the benefit of the rest. So they go out and they draw straws, and guess who lost? Patrick Dolan, the guy with the idea, the whole idea in the first place. But then they handed out the pistol that they brought along with them, and nobody had the will to go and kill him. And then after the long discussion that the United States able to press on, they realized, well, the way the group's going, it's not going to take long. Eddie suggests it's not going to take long before one of us dies, and then that will become, the group will then, have it taken care of on their own. So they head down, and they end up going and finding, they're in a big storm now. It's raining and snowing on and off, and they get south, just a little bit east of Texas Hill Road today, and they find a nice sheltered area because they got to get out of the rain and the snow because they might be there for a while. They don't know whether the snow's going to stop or it's going to go on for a day or two. So they find a nice sheltered spot to stay and group, and they stay there. And that later on became a very famous spot on this course called the Camp of Death.
So at this camp that they formed, remember there were now 14 of them, and they needed a huge fire to warm the large party and to dry their soaked clothes. So they utilized a multi-layered fire platform, just like the one shown here above. Meanwhile, as someone used their sole one hatchet to chop wood to gather for the fire, the metal axe head flew off and went into the deep snow, lost. The log platform slowly sank deeper and deeper into the snow because of the heat, to the point where it was 8 feet deep in a hole. One of the members then clumsily upset the delicate fire, and it was extinguished. Everything was soaked. It was snowing, a 100-year snowstorm. The wood was, they were unable to gather wood, start a fire, couldn't warm their clothes, and their blankets were soaked. They were becoming absolutely desperate.
This is where Eddie came up with an idea, and he had learned it in some of the outdoor things he heard, and it was to create almost like a human teepee. So they spread their blankets on the ground to shelter from the snow, sat on the blankets, and then they covered each other with blankets over the top to trap the heat in, even if the snow came on. If you've ever been in a tent when it has snow on it, it stays actually warmer. You're almost better off leaving the snow on than tapping it off. And this is, they kind of got it in, it's almost like Christmas Eve. Now, can you imagine spending Christmas out in the middle of nowhere in the snow and the rain with this bunch? And it's on Christmas Eve, in the early part of the day, Antonio passes away, and then on Christmas Eve, Franklin Grace passes away. Before he passes away, he calls his daughters over and says, this is it for me. You need to do what you need to do with me in order to get help, because you've got your family back at the lake to take care of. And so then, by the time they're there for 3-4 days there, and it's not long before Patrick Dolan passes, as well as Lemuel Murphy, the 12-year-old young man that was with them. So they're there, now they're 4 have passed, now they're down to 10, and they have to continue on.
Now, this location of Camp of Death is a spot that's been thought to have been lost to history, along with the Forlorn Hope Trail. But using the historical resources we spoke about earlier, available to us and combined with the extensive field research, technology, and forensics, we believe we may have identified the whereabouts of Camp of Death. The next short video shows the remote area of our discovery in the canyons of the North Fork. It also captures one of 2 canine forensic searches that were conducted in October 2020. The dogs are trained to detect only scents of decaying human remains, and they've discovered remains as old as 9,000 years. When a scent is detected, the dog will alert, which means it'll wag its tail, or sit on the spot, or lay down. We had 25 alerts in the spot we think is the Camp of Death, which is a very high indication of human remains. You'll see the vast desolation of this area from the video, and which made for us finding a needle in the forest.
Did you hear your name?
There's lots of alerts going on out here today. I told my Geiger counter because that tail goes a mile a minute and
Camp of Death is a place of great reverence, needless to say, and historical significance. Unfortunately, there would be little forensic evidence left behind beyond human teeth, which would have long since washed away down to the stream at the bottom of the canyon during the snowmelt. There may be some small metallic objects like a button or a pin or a belt buckle, etc. But the only significant artifact would have been that lost accent, which would be the holy grail of Donner finds. In June of this year, we think we discovered that accent. Yet to be determined, but this is a picture of Tim and I doing something that you're really not supposed to do, which is to touch the artifact. And we put it right back where we found it, right after this photo was taken. This is a close-up of that axe head. Now, since this discovery, we've engaged a PhD in anthropology, and we will commence a research in cooperation with the landowners and governmental agencies to remove this artifact and determine if indeed this axe head found matches the characteristics of a personal axe dated in the mid-1800s, forged back east. Early indications look very promising. Additionally, we hope to engage a broader search for possible other artifacts in that area through a proper anthropology dig. So this part of the journey for us is to be continued, but we'll take you back to our story now.
So as they leave the Camp of Death, the sun comes out. Now it's later in December. We've spent 4 days there. They have consumed some of their friends that passed away. It was the first time that cannibalism had been part of the Donner story. Back at the lake, they hadn't done any of that yet. So it was really the Forlorn Hope where that took place for the first time. So the 10 continue. And along the way, we've been always looking for the spot that was referenced in the books where it was the first time they could ever see the heartland of California. From Donner Lake, you can't see that. All along where they've been, it had been snowing and raining. They had almost zero visibility most of the time they were wandering around. But as they made their way around a place that we know as Sawtooth Ridge, and this is where we are, you come to this spot where the entire thing just opens up, and right through the river in a place called Giant Gap, you can see the valley. Of course, it's still 60 miles away, which is a bit sobering for them because they're not even halfway through their journey yet. Now, they've been out for more than 2 weeks now, right? They started on the 16th, and we're looking at the 29th or 30th now. And they, even though they had some sustenance from their friends, they're looking at this, and there's nothing that they can see other than the valley. But this is two things. One is it probably lift their spirits. They finally could see where they were going, and at the same time, a bit sobering in that they weren't anywhere near there and had many, many days to go.
And it should be noted that this spot for the Forlorn Hope would have been deep snow still. It wasn't for us, but they still were snowshoeing at this point in their journey. And of course, the juxtaposition of being in deep snow, lost, no idea whatsoever whether they're going in the right direction, and then seeing the valley all the way off in the distance had to be a melancholy point in time for them.
Wow.
Well, we always felt a presence with us during our expedition, and several times we had things happen to us that were inexplicable. Now, Tim and I have spent hundreds of hours scouting all over the North Fork and have never once, interestingly, seen a single animal. It is a desolate place, as you saw from those videos, not fit for man or beast. But on the third day of our expedition, laying right in the middle of the trail was a dead deer. Why is that strange? Well, as we said, we never saw any animals. But what's more strange is not far from that place is where William Eddy shot and killed a deer for the Forlorn Hope.
Oh, really?
What was that deer doing there? How did it get there? We just looked at each other and said, this is impossible. And we experienced a chill down our spine. So this next video that we're going to show you is a canyon climb that there's no trail. We had to bushwhack. A lot of what we had to do was discover the trail that didn't exist. You'll also see this valley view that Tim showed you in our deer discovery.
So now the Forlorn Hope's over 2 weeks out, 58 days, and they're at the bottom of the North Fork of the American River. And for New Year's Eve, you can imagine being down in New York, they had to climb the south wall of the canyon. And although they had a little bit of food, they had to climb that. It's about a 2,200-foot climb and about 1.5 miles. And when you hear the descriptions of what it's like, they had slid down from Sawtooth Ridge on their snowshoes down into the river, crossed the river, and then climbed the other side, and literally had to pull on bushes and hang on to vines and trees in order to get the traction required to make the climb. And you can see here a little bit what it's like with Jen, and I think that's Bob out ahead there, the steepness of just getting out of the river. At this point, one more person in the party is starting to fall apart. That's Jay Fawcett, the husband of Sarah Graves, and the son-in-law Franklin Graves. He's starting to fall apart, and they literally have to almost carry him up the hill.
So it took them all day, an entire day, to get up the side of this hill. That's just how steep it was. To give you some example here, what we have here on the left is a 35% grade, which is the grade of that hill for 2,400 feet of elevation. The equivalent of climbing the Empire State Building 1.5 times. We undertook the same climb as endurance athletes with all the modern equipment, fresh legs, and plenty of energy. And it astounded us just how hard this climb was. Even with no snow, and we had cleats on our feet. When we arrived at the top, which was about 1.5 hours later, we turned to each other in awe and just said, how did they do it?
Yeah. That's true.
Right.
So they get to the top of that climb, and now you're on the ridge that kind of leads down into Forest Hill, modern-day Forest Hill. It's on the south side of the North Fork. And we were wandering down this road. Today it's called Elliott Ranch Road, and it kind of carves the top of the ridge there, going southwest towards a town called Iowa Hill, famous mining town in the 1850s. As soon as the gold rush got going, Iowa Hill today, there probably hardly anybody lives there. It was a booming metropolis in 1850. And along the way there, they see the river turn and go due south, right here. You can see the river can turn and go down. And that's when they knew, oh, now we're really going the wrong way. We know we need to be on the other side of that river. And they realize they're going to have to make another trek back through the river, which they've just done. And it's in here that Jay Fosdick passes. And then, of course, they used him for sustenance as well. And you can imagine how tough that would have been for Sarah Graves to have her husband pass away in her arms. She stayed behind with him. And as she came to the group to say, hey, you know, I regret to inform everybody Jay died back there. And they said, can we go back and get him? Because we're going to need him to continue on. And so that's, and ours, we made all the way to Iowa Hill. That was the longest day of our trek. Day 3 of our trek ended in Iowa Hill. It was a 27-mile day, and due to some challenges that we had and the steepness and the remoteness of the terrain, we didn't get there until I think 7:30, 8 o'clock at night.
So starvation was grabbing at their guts now, and Foster suggested that Miwoks should be sacrificed next. Eddie wanted no part of that plot and tipped off Luis and Salvador, and they snuck away in the darkened night. The Forlorn Hope was now down to 7, 5 women and 2 men. This next video will show the river crossing that we had and the steep climb that we encountered. It also shows us arriving at Iowa Hill in the dark, as Tim said, our longest day, having traveled 27 miles and encountering our own delays and challenges. It was night 3 for us, with 1 more to go and 2 days until we reached Johnson Ranch. For the Forlorn Hope, they'd still had 10 days ahead of them.
We did it in an hour and 20 minutes. Nuts. Forlorn Hope wake up to snow on the ground and know they have to cross the river again, so they start out and go down what is today known as the Stevens Trail. And we believe at the time it might have been a game or hunting trail. It was built, it became a regular route back in the 1850s. There's a nice sign you'll see in the next video showing how the Stevens Trail was established. But they're down to 7, they cross the river again, climb up to what today is modern day Colfax, and they start finding some faint paths, but they come across this creek bed and they find Lewis and Salvador pretty much wasted there. They're out of food, they're out of energy, and actually the Indians, we don't know that they ever consumed any human flesh in the whole trip to there. They made all that way on what they had carried. And now another argument ensued between Foster and Eddie about what they should do with the two Indians, and Eddie tries to talk Foster out of it, and Foster's literally coming unglued. He's really mad at this point.
So Foster draws the pistol that they had and vows to finish the natives. Eddie again engaged in a scuffle to stop Foster, but this time was too weak to hold him back. Foster approached the two men lying prostrate on the side of the creek and finished them. The food provided energy to proceed, but now their bodies were ravaged. Hunger, exhaustion, bloody and blistered feet, and emotional trauma. They were all slowly dying. A tedious and painful procession lied ahead.
So they press on now, having consumed the Indians, and they pack some with them, and they find some other trails, and they follow some of these more faint trails, and they get hosted into a Nissinan village, which would have been an Indian village there, and they give them some nuts and some food and sustenance, and literally start to shepherd them from Nissinan village to Nissinan village along the Bear River. And that's how they made the way from today, modern day Colfax, to several places where they hand off to the next. And they get to about just east of Camp Far West today, kind of would be northwest of Auburn, and right on the Placer, Nevada County border. And 6 of the 7 just sit down and go, we can't go any further. This is it, we're done. They're 6 miles from Johnson's Ranch. They've consumed it. You can imagine by now they've been hungry. They probably got frostbite on their feet. Their feet are probably bleeding. They haven't eaten anything worth anything in days. But one guy can continue on, and that's William Eddy. So with the assistance of 2 Nissinan Indians, they shepherd him all the way to Johnson Ranch and to the Ritchie house, where they knock on the door, and the Ritchie opens it up, and Eddie's there, and he just says, "Bread." That's all he can say. And Ritchie's daughter breaks out crying from what this man looks like. Bleeding feet, clothes in tatters, a skeleton of a human. And that's where the Forlorn Hope rescue and going after Chris defense is started.
So Eddie had broken through. He told his rescuers about the others 6 miles back, and a rescue party was immediately dispatched to follow the bloody footsteps 6 miles backwards. And those 6 were recovered later that evening and brought back to an adobe house at Johnson Ranch. There they told the news to the Donner Party and their loved ones, all trapped back at the lake. It was January 18th, 1847, and that was the day the world first learned of the horrible fate of the Donner Party. Immediately, plans began for mustering a relief party to head back over the Sierra in the throat of the winter storms to try and save the rest of the survivors. This next video will show our expedition journey from Iowa Hill through the foothills and onto Johnson Ranch, where the wagon ruts are etched in earth for eternity. During the stretch, the Forlorn Hope would have encountered snow until Colfax, and then driving cold rain and mud thereafter. You'll also see the wooden post signifying the location of the adobe house where the 7 surviving members of the Forlorn Hope were brought on Johnson's Ranch. A place where we laid our tribute cards of each Forlorn Hope member that we carried with us, as shown here. As we laid the cards gently at the base of the post, our emotions came flooding forward, and we felt a sense of burden released and mission accomplished. The Forlorn Hope had been reunited after 174 years.
Remember, never take no cutoffs. And hurry along as fast as you can. Virginia Reader. Thanks, everyone.
So the will to survive in humans is well documented in science and medical journals. And as social creatures, our survival instincts are greatly enhanced when one is surviving on behalf of others. This was the case with all 7 survivors of the Forlorn Hope. Each and every one had loved ones back at the lake. They survived in the hopes that others would live.
So what impact did the Forlorn Hope have? We know that 42 members of the Donner Party perished. But we know that them getting out was able to start that first relief party, and there were 3 others after that came to rescue them. And if you look at how the people were, the deaths and the ages and all the people that had passed away at the lake, and you look at some tables of how that would do, we believe that there was another 25 lives that were saved by the Forlorn Hope making it out and getting them rescue sustenance in time. And when you look down through the whole thing, when you look at that to today, that represents about almost 25,000 people that have benefited from that particular, their own rescue effort. So you might ask, well, what happened to that group of the Forlorn Hope? Well, remember when they started out, they had 17, and 2 people turned back. One of the older folks there, Charlie Dutchberger, he returned to the lake, along with William Murphy, a 10-year-old who had started with the group. Well, Berger didn't make it another 2 weeks. He was dead by the end of the year, so he probably would not have made it with the Forlorn Hope, given the difficulties that they had experienced. And William Murphy, he went back and survived, and went on to be like the district attorney of Yuba County. So lived in an illustrious life. How about the rest of the bunch? Well, let's look. Probably the saddest story was William Eddy. Now, he was one of the heroes and led the bunch, was the only one to make it to the thanks. Well, by the time he had tried to make it back on the first relief party, he was too weak and had to go back. He made it out on the third relief party. By the time he got to the lake, his 1-year-old daughter and his wife and his 3-year-old daughter had all perished. So his entire family was gone. William Foster, his 1-year-old son died, and his wife was with him on the Forlorn Hope, so they were together, but they went on to have other children. Catherine Pike, who was the other woman there, her 2-year-old daughter, Naomi, survived and was carried out by one of the rescue parties that came along in the relief party by John Rhodes, but her 1-year-old daughter died, and her husband had been killed earlier in the trek in a firearm accident. So she, really lost quite a bit of her family. You look at Amanda McCutcheon, who was Bill McCutcheon's wife. He had gotten sick and he got stuck down at Sacramento. Well, she ended up dying 10 years later in childbirth, and their 1-year-old had died back at the lake. So they had lost their children as well. And maybe the most impact for one family went to the Graves. Now we know that Franklin passed, and Jay Fostick, which is son-in-law, passed, and his 2 oldest daughters, Sarah and Mary Graves, made it through the expedition. So six remaining children all survived, 3 younger ones, and his wife all passed away. His wife and one of the younger children died in one of the rescue efforts. They got stuck in a place that's very famous up on the pass called Stark Camp. The mother and one of the children passed. And 2 of the children actually got rescued and made it to Johnson's ranch and passed away in the next year, basically from the trauma that they had experienced, spending that much time in the snow and the physical demands of that trek. So a lot of them continued on, but there was a lot of tragedy in those families as well.
So, if you're interested, or this has piqued your interest and you want to learn more details about the Forlorn Hope, well, we recommend 3 books that got us started 7 years ago. Daniel James Brown, The Indifferent Stars Above, which is on the left. Frank Mullen, a local, well-noted author out of Reno, has taught as a professor at the University of Reno, journalism, still a journalist, a fantastic guy, and on our team. His book, called The Donner Party Chronicles. And then George Stewart, a PhD professor from Berkeley, who wrote many, many books, but one of his most famous was Ordeal by Hunger. We've also got loads of information on our website. It's called forlornhope.org. Really easy to remember. So, we wanted to use this opportunity to announce tonight that we actually are going to continue on with more work. And we have a new project, which we're calling the Donner Relief Expedition. And on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 2022, we'll set off from Johnson Ranch and follow the path of the first relief party who braved the vicious winter to try and rescue the Donner Party members still trapped back at the lake. We'll end right here, 5 days later, on February 18th, on the 175th anniversary of the very day the first relief arrived here. More information can be found on our website, again, theforlornhope.org, as well as we have a Facebook, and you can sign up for it there. And there's daily posts from not just us, but all of our historical friends, authors, etc. It's a really interesting site. So if you have interest in this or more interest, please visit our website and you can learn more. So we hope you've enjoyed the story of the Forlorn Hope, and maybe it's provided you with a renewed respect for the human spirit and will to survive. Theirs is one great adventure, possibly one of the greatest endurance treks in history. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a thrill for Tim and I to be here. We're grateful and we truly are humbled. So we'd love to meet you afterwards, and I know Jeremy's going to do a little bit of a Q&A. So thank you, and God bless.
Thank you all so much for being here. We're so thrilled to have you out here and kind of talk about your expedition and project and journey, not just on the expedition itself, but the academic journey that we're just so fond of here in the park system. So we want to open it up for a few minutes for some question and answer. If anyone has any questions, please just raise your hand. We'll probably take about 10 minutes or so for that, and then kind of scoot along so we can clean up and make sure we're all ready for opening tomorrow morning. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, go throw your hand up. I see right over there in the back. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question about the safety of the axe head when you put it back. Did you hide it to protect it so nobody else will walk on it?
I can neither confirm. No, we put it right back where we found it.
I just left it exposed there.
It's funny how we had been coached up a little bit on that by some people who did that for a living or have done a lot of digs. And they mentioned that if you're going to find it, it's not going to be 12 inches underground or 8 inches underground. It's going to be probably on the surface, but maybe not visible. And that's kind of what we did. We found it just a little bit under the dirt. And you can imagine it was kind of unbelievable. I was like, we were out there, and I go, oh, yeah, what do you got? Oh, we got an axe head. He's like, yeah, sure. Yeah, we got an axe head. But just to give you a little bit of history, Bob, but when you look at it, it looks different. It's not like a standard axe head of today where a wooden handle goes up through and it's threaded through the, through the thing, yeah. And when you looked at it, part of it had broken off. Well, imagine that, right? The axe head had broken off. And Bob, he can give you a little, please talk to the archaeologist about it.
So the archaeologist, among other things, happens to be an axe head savant. He was assuming, when we told him about it, he's very skeptical, rightfully so, that, it's probably an axe from the railroad, because there's a small narrow gauge railroad in there to help with the mining. And he said, I actually have all the maps, and where you've decided Camp of Death is actually a junction area where a lot of the railroads came together. And so you probably found lots of, spikes, and he said, yep, and shovels, yep, and he said, yeah, that axe head's just going to be one of the tools. And so when he got there and we showed it to him, he went, oh my God, this is not a standard issue railroad axe. This is completely different. He said, it's a personal axe. And how do I know that? He said, because the metal on top was wrapped around, not forged. He said, this was a hand-forged, probably from the East Coast. He said, the age on it looks exactly what it should, although that's to be determined. But he said, what's most important is it's a smaller axe, and it's been ground down by hand. You can see how it's been sharpened over and over and over again. He said, any axe issued by the railroad would have had automated and a grinding wheel. So he said, this is definitely not a railroad axe. And so he was encouraged, and we did put it back, but we did hide it. just in case.
Well, I was going to add to that, one more thing I want to get to, sir. The skepticism here, we literally, the first time we went out there with the dog thing, thinking, well, what do we know? We're just a bunch of weekend bumpkins. Well, we think this might be it. And we took literally the LeBron James of dogs out there to do the dig, to do the fencing. It's a dog that's been on the million. Earhart, this guy's traveled $250,000 or miles with this dog in planes and on places out there. And it was all over the place, and it was alert. And then that was when he had said to us, listen, one dog is not good enough. You need to go get a completely new set of dogs that have never seen this before and bring them in there and see what they do. Now, if you get a bunch of other dogs and they're having the same reaction, then, hey, you might have something here. And so we did that. We're like, hey, this is pretty exciting, And then the archaeologists kind of poo-pooed that whole, those dogs, they're just looking for treats. And dog, if you got anything for a treat. But then, we got out there and he looked at it and, realizing this, I might need to spend a little more time out here. So we went out with our photographer, spent 9 hours at what we thought was Camp of Death. And so the story continues. We were almost going to go in there today, but with the snow, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, we have a lot more work to do there. We kind of handed it over to those guys. That's kind of kind of Bob's and I scope of practices, archaeological digs and all that. They're going to do some more work out there with the assistance of the Forest Service. Luckily, the archaeologist I'm talking about has already done what you're looking for, so he knows the routine and whatnot. So, yeah. Sir.
Did you have to metal detect to find that, or was it just sitting out in
We
the
can
open?
neither confirm or deny.
Yeah, it was,
Yeah. Next question. Yes.
Is there anywhere we can see the full video footage of your truck?
Yeah, so the question was, is there a place to see the full video? We have a fair bit of it on our website. If you go to the media area, there's some videos there. We also created a 5-part, they're about 3 minutes each, series which are in YouTube. And you can see them on our webpage. You can watch them in order from prelude all the way to epilogue. And it takes you through the entire journey. Plus, it gives you the visual history of Forlorn Hope, and it's a lot of the footage. So those would be two good places to go and check out. Anything else? Yes.
Going back to the axe, when they lost that, did they lose the ability to make fires from then on?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, other than maybe finding stuff on the ground. There's a lot of timber out there, but, a lot of it, and where they were probably at that time, was probably all green timber. And they really had to go and search around. That was part of the daily thing. That was the shortest days of the year, right? They had to kind of get there and get everything done before it got dark. And then they had lamps or flashlights, or the main thing was to get to camp, build your platform, get the fire going, then you could dry out, and you could eat and stay warm.
So they did have a flint with them, and they could make fires, but at that time, at Camp of Death, it was pouring rain and snowing. And so every inch of clothing was soaked. In fact, they finally did get the fire going 2 days later by taking a tiny little bit of cotton from inside of one of the women's dresses, and it was just enough to flint against and get it going. But they went 2 days shivering under those blankets with absolutely no heat whatsoever.
And one time there at the Camp of Death, when they were trying to get the fire going, one of them burned their face. That was Foster or Eddie. And they went to go take the flint and put it on, and went to light it, blew up in his face and hurt his face. So it was pretty, hazardous.
Wow. Anything else?
Well, we'll do this again once the Dawn Relief expedition happens, so make sure you all come back. We're just so appreciative of you all supporting this, supporting all of our efforts. Thank you, Bob and Tim. It's going to be